All right, let's get started since we're recording and live now. And Steven has started a watch party that I can't get out of. All right, tonight's discussion, Master of the Beast from episode 3 of the BEMA Podcast. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
First things first, what did you guys think about this episode?
There's much to think about. It
Yeah.
was a short one, but I had a lot to think
Yeah,
about.
it's actually short.
I didn't like it as much as I like some of the other ones yet
You
so
know,
far.
I felt that too.
Yeah.
It was okay,
Yeah.
but it wasn't like, oh.
Just wait until we get to the Noah one.
Right.
That'd be
thought-
really
Well, there's a lot down the
I'm
road that are
sure.
way better. Yeah.
I'm sure, but
Well, that one.
It's
Noah
like there
was
wasn't a
worse.
whole ton of content in this, but it was.
Well, I thought also that the title was a little misleading. The Beast, I was thinking, oh, we're going to deal with flesh and all that. No, we're talking about the relationship. So it was a little bit. I was
I
expecting
guess the
some of
beast
them
was
hardcore
what Cain had
to deal with.
To do, yeah. Yeah. There were some parts in it though that were pretty cool. We were talking a little bit on the way over about how he was talking about people with the Eastern mindset would like the genealogies,
That's
but we
very true.
don't. And I was like, that's super true. But I was wondering why. Like, why would they like the genealogies? I think he talked a little bit, but I thought, because he mentioned too, I think just because the names mean something.
Right. It's
And for
because
us, we don't know.
It's because it's the story.
Yeah.
And when you look at the genealogies, which he didn't get into that, but they're not listed every single one. We think that it's this guy, then this guy, and then this guy, and this guy. But it's this guy, a few generations later, this guy. We think it's just supposed to be very chronological, step by step, but it wasn't, because the important thing was not who they were, but the story.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it gets. I asked a professor at LCU a couple days ago about that, because we were talking and I brought it up and I mentioned that we don't like the genealogy, but the original people would have, and he said, well, and he told me why.
Because they knew the story, yeah.
Because it's the story.
Yeah, we're still stuck on the scientific lab report.
Right. We get bogged down in the details and forget the point.
Yeah.
But I do wonder too, because we were talking about how we are not connected to people. Like, we don't go, this is my people, the story of my people. But a lot of them would have.
Sure.
Just in our culture, we don't do that. Even if I know I come from my grandpa was a Richter, so we're German. I don't go, my people. I'm like, whatever. I just live my life. I'm not.
I'm suspicious of it.
Connected to this. Well, Mary's grandpa's name's Rudolph Otto, so we have a lot of German in the mix. But
We know Chris comes from Viking.
Do any of your family live in South America?
Yeah, after World War II, particularly.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, thank you.
So they start off in what? Chapter 3 or chapter 4?
It was
Genesis.
four.
Yeah, it was 4 because I was looking at 3 and I was like, that's not it.
No, it's 4.
So they start off in chapter 4 of Genesis with his name, meaning acquired.
I kind of had a question about that.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, this is the first person ever named that. So how do I know, or how did they know the name meant that? Or did it come to mean that through later generations?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
'Cause-
how wide was that vocabulary? at
'Cause
the
that-
time?
Yeah.
If he's the first guy ever named that, then how did it mean that if there hadn't been generations of other people named that before? So I just wonder sometimes when we say things like that, well, the word meant originally this. Well, did it mean that originally, or did it come to mean that over time? That later generations said, "Oh, well, that means," that's. So I just wondered that.
Yeah.
Bone freak could be something like, what is it? The word Adam is the word for man.
Yeah, dirt.
Yeah, dirt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
dirt.
dirt.
And so if it's something like that, where
Yeah, that was pretty clear.
that name is that name is like a word
Yeah.
they took and said
Yeah.
that we're gonna call you this, but that
Yeah.
word is from the language.
Maybe so.
Like if they were rednecks, she would have been Git. I'm gonna name you Git. So do you think that she named him that in spite of Adam, or because God helped her
I don't know.
acquire a son?
Yeah,
I could see either way.
I don't really
Because she
know.
couldn't have been happy with him
Mm-hmm.
after saying it was this woman. Like,
Go blame her.
Especially living in now a broken, sinful world where they were living in a perfect world where they didn't have to deal with that. Now they go from that to what they have to deal with now. They don't really have a roadmap for that.
Yeah.
So
It's possible.
I don't even know how their relationship was after all
I don't
that.
know how long it's been since they went out of the garden. It wasn't like
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
10 months later they had
Right.
a baby. So I could see it both ways. I could see that although they had to leave the garden, God didn't leave them.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a...
Somebody said that the other day. I heard somebody.
Probably a pretty good point. You've been listening.
Inside the garden, they didn't have any knowledge of right or wrong, so everything was all good. Now they're outside the garden, they're seeing everything, good, bad, ugly, and wow, I can't imagine, because we're all born into it. I can't imagine going from one to the other and having to deal with that.
Yeah. I wonder about. Okay.
So I could see it both ways too.
Yeah.
I could see some bitterness there. In fact, I'll be honest. When I originally read that and started looking at that scripture, that was my impression, that there's some bitterness there.
Yeah.
But now, maybe not.
Right.
Maybe not.
But something you said made me think. I wonder if how much, and this is where I really haven't thought about it, but do we take, this is how things are now, and we put it on those people back then? Right. Because to say she might not have been happy with him, she might not have even thought that. She might have been like, that was my fault, I shouldn't have done that. But we take, her wife now would be mad at her husband. Oh, that's how it must have been. We don't know. Right. Culturally how it was.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the first birth, wasn't it?
Yeah, there is no
So
culture.
there's no-
there's-
There's no knowledge in this area at the beginning.
Right.
So
I was just thinking, like, Adam and Eve are walking around outside the garden, and Eve has no desire to procreate at the moment because of what just happened. And Adam's like, come on, I'm the only man on earth. You know what I mean? So it's like, she's like, after the whole apple
If
thing.
you were the last man on earth.
Yeah. She's like, not if you're the last man on earth. He's like, I'm the only man on earth. So
What if
10
she-
years later.
What if she prayed to God, like, please send another one, please?
Yeah.
This one's broken. I don't know.
Is there no one else? So I was thinking, how would, like, if you were in her position, how would that affect you, your decision in naming your child, your firstborn child, if you're in that position of that hurt or that betrayal, really?
Yeah.
Well, there are other examples. What's the guy's name? Ichabod. She named him Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. That was the daughter-in-law of Samuel, and I forgot her husband's name, but they both died the day she gave birth. And so, and then she died. So she named him Ichabod, the glory of the Lord has departed. She couldn't see. They tried to say, look, you have a boy, it's awesome. But she was so stuck in her hurt and in her pain that she named him God's left us. And so maybe that's the same thing with Eve, feeling some of that as well, or having, I don't know, because we try to take what we think and put it back into the story and thinking, well, that's what they thought because that's what I think.
Yeah.
When we don't really know whether she was feeling like, God helped us, we have a son now, or
Or was it God help me, I have a son?
where she put the emphasis.
There's another one of you?
Why couldn't we have had a little Evie?
Yeah.
Well, my thought too I had a question about it was, okay, so both Adam and Eve are in the garden. Why would they ever need to have children? Because what God made was good and it was perfect. He only made the two of them. Why do I need more of you? Then something happens. They get thrown out of the garden. But now he's going to tell them, now I want you to possess the whole earth. So I'm kind of wondering, God had already made his two children. Don't really need any more. But now, I've thrown you out. And now the only way you can have children is because I made it possible. now. But before, I mean, not even had a reason to even have children. So it's I mean, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, kind of problems with that story, just of unknowns.
Right.
Because it's just a story, not historical fact by any means, and that's one of the things we have to keep in mind. Plus, it's poetry. Kind of give us an idea of telling us about God and how He intervened and influenced people. So,
Now they didn't go into this in the podcast, but I've always tried to understand without being too crazy about it. But it says God created them, male and female. He created them. Them is plural. And then later, right after this, Cain's going to go build a city.
where everybody else come from.
How did he build a city if there's only 5 people on Earth?
Yeah.
So
When he found a wife.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other big question: where did he get a wife? And then we always go, well, it had to be one of his sisters, But what I think is, this is not a historical record, scientific document. It's a story, and in the story, God had a chosen people, and they lived in the garden. There may have been other people who didn't live in the garden.
Yeah.
And
Right.
there may have, the world may have had a lot of people, because he did create them male and female. And so there may have been a lot of people. And I had a friend was trying to explain it to me one time, and I didn't believe him. Because I said, no, there are only 5 people on the whole earth. But then how did Cain go build a city if there's only him and his wife? You don't build a city when there's just 2 of you.
Right.
His sister wife.
Which is just,
It's
That was a lot of kids.
so,
but niece wife.
Actually,
Yeah.
go ahead.
are they reproducing like rabbits?
Yeah.
Just everywhere? Or
I've
was
always
there,
had that same
or
thought.
was it a bigger, we get lost in the trying to understand all the nitty-gritty details and miss the point of trust the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me to trust the story. Don't get caught up in the, well, where did Cain get his wife, and how did he build a city, and how many were there, and he created them, plural, and all that.
And how does that fit in with,
Plus-
he created them, male and female. Actually, it kind of mentions it later on in the chapter in verse 14. It says, since you are banishing me today, he says, I can't bear this punishment. It's too great for me in verse 14. Since you are banishing me today from the face of the earth, and I must hide from your presence and become a restless wonder on the earth, whoever finds me will kill me.
Right. Well, who's going to find him?
I know.
His baby brother Seth.
Yeah.
He hasn't been born yet?
The guy hasn't been born yet, right. So that kind of implies that there were other people. But does it really matter? Probably not. Like you said, trust the story. Trust the story. But
Yeah.
and even then, I love the idea, and it's I know it's more than just an idea of how God is. That where it talked about, God was trying to talk to Cain, and he went into the whole thing about how Cain was mad and how he was angry because his sacrifice was rejected, but yet Abel's. And then he went into this, well, because of his name, he had to acquire, or in my app, it says possess, but same thing. But then I'm not a Bible scholar, and I don't specialize in Hebrew, so I got to trust the scholar in this.
Yeah.
And and he was getting insecure, and his security was leading to anger, and when we all react on our emotions, bad things usually happen.
Yeah.
In this case, disaster. And it talked about how there's just 2 points I wanted to make. One was God was saying, look, you're not a beast. You have control. You don't have to do this. In fact, I'm begging you not to do this, because it will devour you if you let it. And so God is just, wow, what more could he do? And then after he did it, he said, where is your brother Abel? And I love the scripture, because it says, who am I, my brother's keeper? And I remember one writer a long time ago says, yeah, we are our brother's keeper. We're supposed to take care of one another. But also, he says, "Where is your brother?" Because he already knew. The same one when Adam had blown it, and he says, "Where are you?" He knew where he was. Basically, he said, and I love it. He says, "You're not where I put you," and neither was Cain. He wasn't where he put him. Where is he? And then so just like God took care of Adam and Eve when they had to leave, He took care of their shame. He made clothing for them. He also took care of Cain and protected him from all the other people that were out to get him. And that his relationship with Cain never changed. He didn't love him any less in spite of what he did.
Right.
And just wow. I just really love that part about the podcast.
Yeah, I was surprised he didn't give him the death penalty
True.
after he killed his brother, but there's only so many people. So, why do you think they needed to bring God an offering? Was a question that came to my mind.
Where did they get the concept?
Well,
Because it never
Get
had
it
been
from
told to
exactly
them.
right.
Hebrews
They got it from the other people.
Hebrews 11:4 says, "By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous, and God spoke well of his offering." So they presented an offering by faith. So that there was instruction there. There was knowledge. It wasn't just they didn't just pull it out of the air and say, "Hey, I think I want to go here and give an offering." So they did it by faith. And the difference was Abel was by faith and Cain wasn't. So what was the difference?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Mark.
And I've wondered too, because it goes along with what you said Sunday about how God didn't leave them, and the fact was they got to actually be with God, right? So God came down and talked to them,
he
walked with them, they saw him. So it didn't say he stopped when he kicked them out of the garden. In fact, he obviously didn't, because they brought the But it's interesting to me that they actually brought. So it means that he was there in some kind of physical or metaphysical whatever form, because they knew where he was to bring the gifts to him. And I just wonder if they brought it, because you think about worship, right? We talk about worship and we just do church and we do whatever. But if God stood here, we wouldn't go, "Oh, we should have a time to worship." We would just go, "Oh, it's God," and we would just fall on our faces.
Right.
And I just wondered that as part of it, they knew he was around, they knew he was there, and who he was. So it was a response. Like their giving the gifts was a response to him. I mean, there may have been some teaching, who knows? But
To me, go ahead.
no, you're good.
Well, to me in the podcast, the professor, I forgot his name, but he was kind of alluding to that kind of like primitive man, offering, making an offering to appease an angry God. That's kind of the impression I got, because they weren't commanded to do it. How did they know what to bring? He asked the question, and that they were trying to gain. He used the analogy of two children trying to gain their father's favor in order to get more blessing. Like Cain was a farmer,
Right.
and he had no control over the soil or the rain, but he knew God did. Which kind of maybe led up to his insecurity and his anger, that his younger brother Abel was going to, one up him and gain more favor from God because he liked his offering over his.
Yeah. That's where I disagreed with the podcast.
Yes, me too.
Because of they didn't know, and Cain was stuck. Whatever came out of the ground, he was stuck with. But if you're a shepherd, it ain't that easy either.
No, it's not.
There's some stuff there that you have no control over, and so that when he started doing that analogy about not having any control, he lost me, because it was all supposition.
Yes.
There's nothing in the text. There's nothing there that says that, and because I do look at Hebrews and it says by faith Abel offered a better sacrifice. So it wasn't an issue of they didn't appease the angry God, or a meat sacrifice is better than a vegetable sacrifice. It's the issue of whether they worshiped by faith or not. And I think it gets back to, did they trust the story? Where Abel in his offering was an offering of trusting the story and somewhere Cain wasn't. I don't know where he wasn't because it doesn't say. And I've heard people say, well, there's supposed to have been a blood sacrifice.
Yes, I've heard
because,
that.
that's
Yep. Yep.
and Cain should have traded some vegetables and got a blood sacrifice. But again, that's not stated in there. We've come up back later on. Well, we're in Leviticus now, so there has to be a blood sacrifice.
That's right.
But
There were no vegetable sacrifices in Leviticus.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that there. And that's, again, I think, trying to put back into the story what we think
Good
rather
point.
than what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And so
point.
I think there was an issue that Cain didn't trust God, and that's why he got mad. And God pleaded with him. That's a crazy part of the story there, where God's pleading with him because he knows. And he's pleading with him.
Yeah.
And I think, too, when it tells me when I'm in the midst of doing something really stupid, that I can feel like I have no choice, I have no control, and they got me angry and it happened. And when God would have said, no, you're not the beast, you're not a beast, even though you may be acting like a senseless animal, you're not one. You have control. So we all have control when temptation is hitting us, and there are times when I don't feel that.
Right.
Cut me off on the road, and whatever.
Here comes the beast.
The
Beast is here.
beast comes out, or you hurt my feelings, and the beast comes out, or and
Cindy
all
leaves you by yourself on
she
the
walks
aisle.
off. She walks off and just left me. The beast comes out, and then you
Yes.
realize how stupid you are, or
Yeah.
foolish you are.
Good point.
And I think that teaches me that you have control. You have to choose to do the wrong thing.
Wow.
You have to choose to do the wrong thing. And you can,
It's so true.
we have that, we have all the temptation in the world hidden in us. But at some point you have to say, well, I'm going to do it. I know it's wrong, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And because we weren't left without control. We try to think that when you're in sin you don't have control, but that's not true.
Yeah.
No. In fact, James, I think chapter 2 tells us that we are the result of our temptation. It comes out of our hearts, but then also I love it in 1 Corinthians 10. Not only, you're right, I agree with you. We, not only do we have a choice, but God actually provides a way out for us. I mean, just like Cain. I mean, God told him, "Look, you have a way out. Don't do this," and he chose it.
Yeah. Romans 8 gets into the sinful nature and talks about how we have an obligation, but it's not to the sinful nature.
Good point.
So we do have a sinful nature, and when that thing is rampant, we don't have much control because we don't want to have control at that point. When we're caught up in our sinful nature, and I remember when
That's so true.
when I was studying and I wrote out my 3 pages of sin list, the guy I was studying with said, so that's what you did. Why'd you do it? And
Well, that's 6 pages of a good explanation.
so
Let me go back again.
But we went back and forth, and what he tried to get me to see was that the actions were coming out of a heart that was prideful, that was rebellious, that was selfish. So there's the actions that you might do, but where did they come from?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and he was trying to get me to see that because I had an excuse for everything. This happened and I was young, and this happened and I was with this, and I had an excuse for everything, and I wasn't getting to the honest. You're a selfish jerk. Is what you're prideful. You're arrogant, and we look at the actions and not at the heart. And so when you're wrapped up in your sinful nature, you have very little self-control. But once you have the Holy Spirit, isn't that the fruit of the Holy Spirit?
It is.
Self-control.
Yes.
And now, as a follower of Jesus with the Holy Spirit, for me to sin, I have to actively choose to sin. And it doesn't matter what my wife does or says, or She may say the meanest, ugliest thing to me, but I still have the choice how I'm going to respond.
Wow, that's very profound.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she walks up and slaps me in the face. I have to decide if I'm going to do something bad or not. It's my choice, especially as a follower of Jesus with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And I don't think sometimes we dismiss that so much that we think we're going to knuckle our own way through it, white knuckle our way through life, and not realize God has given us a spirit. So why are we allowing ourselves to be subject
Right.
to the world again when that's not who we are?
Yeah.
You know what's crazy is think about too is who had more face-to-face time with God, Cain or Abel? Well,
Well,
according to
in this situation, it was Cain.
In this
it was
story,
Cain.
in
So,
this
so
story.
he had more face-to-face time, yet he still was angry and downcast. And one of the things that brought up in the podcast too was, why don't you just come back tomorrow and bring something else?
Yeah.
Go home, cool off, say, hey, no big deal, I'll come back tomorrow. Why were you so angry and bitter at your brother? His was accepted and yours was not. Well, maybe tomorrow yours would be. Maybe his wouldn't be. He didn't give that opportunity because, like I said, it came down to choices. Because when we give in to how we feel, instead of thinking it through and taking responsibility for how we feel, because we're the ones, like I said, we choose what we feel. No one can make us feel anything. We choose that. It's all in our head. And so he chose to be angry. He chose to seek revenge against his brother. He chose to be mad at God.
To me, it's amazing
Instead of just coming back.
how sin jumps. Okay, you were angry.
Yeah.
Why'd you
Faith
kill your
was-
brother?
Yeah.
How did you get from I'm
Yep.
I'm disappointed that God didn't like my sacrifice? How did you go from I'm disappointed to come here?
Yeah. Let's go take a walk over the field.
Let me show you this rock.
Now you're
Well,
the
because Mom and
sacrifice.
Dad's house was down the street and he was closer, so I just was going to kill somebody today. So
I mean, but when you look at our own failure, sometimes we can go, how did I get there? You know, I was here, and this happened, and I got upset, and next thing I know, I'm over here, doing something like what? How did we jump? And I see it.
a good
I guess
question.
one of the biggest areas where my sinful nature comes out is in marriage, when my wife can push a button I didn't even know I had.
Right.
Until she
She's
pushed
like,
it.
you got to break the glass to push this button.
And she does. And then I can jump from I'm upset that this one little thing happened to our whole life has been nothing but a disaster.
It's a lie.
I mean, just how do you get from
That can happen with daughters too.
Again.
You said this and it upset me and bothered me, but that doesn't make my 43 years of marriage a lie, or you've never loved me, or you've never done this. But we get to those never phrases and stuff, and you're like, wow, how did that happen? And I think God's standing right there saying, sin is crouching out the door.
Desire is heavy.
I think you made that point on Sunday when you were talking about Jesus on Sermon on the Mount and talking about anger. And you said I guess the Old Testament said, do not murder. And he's like, let's take it one step further. Do not even be angry.
Yeah,
you
let's
know?
back that up.
Right. And I think it's because he knew that's how easy it could happen. Look at those guys.
Right? Look what happened to Cain.
Exactly. What I got me was during this podcast, he's taken the assumption, that in the emotions of anger, first, there was fear or insecurity because of his name. That he was supposed to live up to his name, or he was going to fail, to live up to this name, and in doing that just made me feel afraid of being afraid. So I mean, I realize he's using a lot of things here. He's making these points, and he's building up to them. He begins here, which leads to here, which leads to here, and that proves. Well, maybe he's not trying to prove, but these are his opinions about these scriptures, or his comments. And comments are good. I mean, we have commentaries. We go to them a lot, and they're okay. And I think they're good as long as there's good sound scripture, to back them up using hermeneutics.
He said he took a lot of this from Rabbi Foreman.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I actually found the Serpents of Desire
Look at you.
article. Like,
Way to go, Chris.
there's 7 articles, and I can share the link with y'all so we can
Yeah.
read it if you want to. But I shared one of
I would
Rabbi
like to see
Foreman's videos in the group me, and it was 45 minutes long, but dadgum, it was full of good stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
And so back to Genesis. I read it all the way through while I was listening, and
Was I talking that long?
the thing that stuck out to me, not while I was listening to you, I was listening earlier. The thing that stuck out to me is
I
that they
can't.
both brought offerings from what they did. Cain was in charge of the crops. Abel was in charge of the animals. But then I was thinking, there's no animals without crops.
Yeah.
So it's like Cain has to produce so that Abel can even have
Right.
these animals.
Right.
So I was like, would Cain be mad if Abel brought his sacrifice? Well, you wouldn't have your sacrifice if it weren't for me. So I'm like thinking through human thoughts and how I would feel.
Right.
True.
And I was thinking about a scenario that ended up being wrong, but I was just thinking if I go to someone and they react, and then they react to someone else after me, and I felt like they didn't react, or they reacted differently, that's on me.
Right.
Like, I'm the one feeling that, not that person reacting, because one thing that always gets me is like when people come up to you and tell you things like, oh, Mark's lesson was so good on Sunday, or Ronnie's lesson was so good on Sunday, but nobody comes up to you and says your lesson was so good. You know what I mean? Like, nobody comes up to you and says it, but nobody comes up to you and says it. They say it to other people. It's like you're missing these things because you're assuming that nobody is saying you're doing a good job anywhere. And it's just because they're saying it about you. Like, I look at it as like my dad doesn't tell me I do all these great things. He tells other people. Like other people be like, oh yeah, your dad always talks about you. It's like, he doesn't tell me, So it's like, but I know he does because I do it. But I think Cain is maybe just too young, too naive to understand that. Like, and there's just not a lot of examples to draw from. He's got mom and dad who got kicked out of whatever garden they lived in before now. I don't know what that was, 'cause I was born out here. So it's just a lot of things that I'm trying to think of from a human standpoint rather than what I know just about scripture or about commentary or about what other people have said about it. So I wanted to work through that in my own mind.
That's interesting. So what was that dinner table like? So, Dad, you remember you were the one that got us kicked out. Well, and then he would look over at his wife, and then they go start again.
Yeah, and one thing that Ray was talking about when Cain was had the most time with God in this, it reminds me of the prodigal son. Not the prodigal son, but his brother.
Yeah.
Who's like, well, what about my fattened calf? You know what I mean? I've been here the whole time. He's like, you still have all this. What's your problem?
Right.
So that's what another thing that just popped in my head when he was talking about him spending the time with him. And Gordon hit on it earlier, but he comes around. God says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door and its desire is to have you, but you must rule over it. So we've kind of gone through that already and discussed it. But fear, one thing I got of it was fear causes us to believe that we aren't enough. And I think that goes back to the last story about Adam and Eve. Eve not feeling like she's enough like God, that she has to somehow become more like God with this fruit from the tree. And so he was saying that fear is the antithesis of trust.
Yeah.
And when you have little kids, you're always irritated that they don't believe you. They don't believe we're gonna have dinner, or it's just like dumb things, and you're like, come on, dude, like we eat dinner every day, we eat lunch every day, breakfast every day, like just believe me, it's gonna be all right. And I how many times I do that with God though? Like God's like, you just shut up and just do what I say. Just listen to me.
Yeah.
Does that teach us? I've got to think about the emotionally healthy church. How much does our sin come from fear?
Every bit of it.
How
Every
much?
bit.
If we would deal more with our insecurities and our fears, maybe we wouldn't have to. I mean, you think about all the things that are temptations. I think there's some relation to fear. I got to make more money, so I'm going to
Sell drugs.
right. I'm going to do whatever, I don't think my wife likes me, so I'm going to look at pornography. I don't think, we just start having all this, and because of fear. And if we would deal with our fear, then it'd be easier to trust. And maybe it gets back to why Abel's was pleasing and Cain's wasn't. Because Abel offered his in faith and Cain offered his in fear.
Yeah, because that's one thing I was wondering too. I wondered if Abel was like getting his ready, and then Cain's like, "What you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm about to whip this up for God." And he's like, "Oh, I gotta go get something," He's afraid. He's running over here and getting some weeds and decorating them with like a dandelion. He's like, "Hey, God, like, how's this?"
Yeah.
God's like, "Oh, it's okay, I guess. Some weeds."
I made it.
Yeah. I picked it out of the ground. You made it grow, but I picked it. Right?
Yeah, the fear being like the antithesis to trust, it like really hit me hard, because I even had a conversation with Gordon a while back, because he was telling me about how his job, like before his current job, he used to have so much more trust in people, because he's a manager. So he's above
Food industry
all,
will do that too.
yeah, all these workers. He's like, I used to have so much trust in people about like, they know that they can do this, that they'll be on top of it. But he's like, not anymore. I constantly question even my roommates. I bring it back home, and I'm like, oh shoot, you're like how I've been my entire life. I'm so sorry.
Wow.
You've changed, and that's rough, buddy. But the fear seems to be a constant connection just in these like few chapters of Genesis at the very beginning. Like it's crazy. And how what you were saying about faith, it seems that Abel, he was just thinking that, oh, God's going to provide, and so it's going to be okay because he had faith in God. Whereas Cain just wasn't. He was trying to like live up to his name, or he was trying to I don't know, like just not miss out on God's blessings. And I wonder if they both got this from like the sacrifices that God made for their parents, Adam and Eve. Like I wonder if they saw that, but they took like I guess different perspectives on it. Like maybe Abel, he took it as, oh, I just need to trust in God because he can take care of it. Whereas Cain maybe thought, I need to earn it. I don't know.
Could be different.
One of the things that kind of stuck out to me too is how sin grew like a weed. First it started out with insecurity,
Yep.
led to fear led to anger, and he carries out murder. And then
premeditated,
what does he do
yeah.
with God? He lies, bold-faced lies to him.
Yeah.
I don't know where my brother's at. His blood is crying out from the ground. So I mean, it just kept growing and spreading out. And I think that was kind of God's point with all of this too, was just say, you got to use some weed killer when it's small. Protect your heart. I'm here for you. If you're afraid,
So true.
be honest with yourself. Say I'm afraid, but is it something I really need to be afraid of? Does someone got a gun to my head? And that's one of the things. I let fear control my whole life in a lot of things, so I was always insecure around everybody. And I kind of had to step back now and think. Even just a few days ago, I was talking to a patient, and I know the other doctor that I work for. I started feeling the anxiety when he walked in. Like the first thought I had was I am in trouble because I was talking to the patient. It wasn't anything, wasn't medical diagnosis or anything like that. I don't do any of that, but and then I had to stop myself and say, wait a minute. Until he says something to me and tells me that he has a problem with me, why am I being afraid? And immediately it started regressing. But that's something I'm just this year started learning how to do, is start to ask myself those questions. Okay, starting to feel this, is it real? Because a lot of times those feelings are lying to me out of my ego, saying, oh, you're not good enough. No, you're doing something wrong. And then I have to go, wait a minute, that's not true. And once I started addressing those things, it's gotten much easier, and that voice has gotten much quieter. But I have to be aware of it all the time.
Yep.
And I think for him, it was this loud, booming voice in his head. I'm not good enough. I'm ticked off. And
It was the only voice in his
it was
head at the time.
and because he wasn't listening to the right voice. And even when the right voice was talking to him, hey, watch yourself. Watch how you're feeling. I know where you're at. I know what you're thinking. You need to cool it, son. I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. You know, and then now he's bold-faced lying to God. Yeah, but I can see it definitely how it grows, and then it just grows and grows until you deal with it. That's the only way to kill it.
For Cain, it kept on going. Because when he left, he's like, but they're going to kill me. I mean, he's still,
He was
Yeah,
paranoid.
still- fear was still there.
his
Fear
life,
was still
his
there.
life is
Right.
all about fear and mistrust.
You're like, who's going to kill you?
And his cruelty just
Your
increased.
dad? Yeah, your dad will probably want to kill you for killing your brother.
Yeah.
But that isn't who you're talking about.
Yeah, what you were saying about the anxiety reminded me of, remember it was a video I watched or something I listened to, it was talking about the reptile brain and how, you know, we get a call from our boss, I need to see you in my office. We immediately think, oh crap, I'm in trouble, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my house, I'm going to starve to death. Like it goes straight to death.
Yep.
Like we have this fear that just goes straight to death. And that's what made me think of that when you were talking about it. And they call it the reptile brain, but we still have to master that beast, that reptile in our brain that's telling us these things. And so we went through a lot of stuff tonight. Where I want to end is he didn't talk about a chiasm this week, so I went through just to see if there was one, and I found it because it starts off the chapter with Adam and Eve procreating, ends the chapter with Adam and Eve procreating. I was like, oh, well, what's this inner verse? Gordon brought it up way early. It said, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. And so I started wondering, I was like, so his punishment is that he has to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does God do? Same thing he did for his parents.
Yeah.
He covers them with a mark to protect him. So of course I had to look at what that mark was. And the word for it is OTH. I don't know how to say if it's oath or I don't think it's oath, but it's oath. And it's just a sign or token of any kind. And so my immediate thought was, what's one sign that all Jews have?
I don't know.
Star,
It's-
raven?
No, circumcision.
Yeah.
Oh,
So like Ray and I were talking about it
Yeah.
from
From Moses.
Noah.
Noah.
Right? Yeah, we were talking about from Noah. If it started there. So I was wondering if it started here. Of course, other people have gone on to add racism and stuff like that. And then other rabbis have said, well, maybe God put his name on his forehead or on his arm, like his literal name, so that people wouldn't attack him and kill him anywhere.
whatever the mark was, you could see it from a distance. I think circumcision would be a little hidden.
Rain cloud.
Prove it.
Yeah. Prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah, part